So now we'll be discussing some of the important questions based on the chapter 3, 4, and 5. So, the fourth chapter is basically the polymorphism. So, polymorphism basically is divided into compile-time polymorphism and runtime polymorphism. So, the concept of pointer is also introduced in order to implement the runtime polymorphism. So, the pointer is a variable, which is basically used to hold the memory address of another variable. Now, the same pointer here is used to hold the address of an object. Till now, we have seen a pointer which holds the address of a variable. Variable can be integer, float. But now we will be using the same pointer to hold the address of an object. Now, let's recall the general syntax of declaring a pointer. So, the general syntax of declaring a pointer is we need to write a data type, then we need to use a star of the variable. So you can create different types of pointer. If you want to point to an integer variable, you have to use this syntax. You have to use a create a pointer to a float variable. You have to use this syntax. Similarly for whatever for characters. Now there are two operators which are related to pointer operations. One is the star operator and one other is the ampersand. Star is called as a value add operator, which means which gives the value which is stored at that particular location. Whereas ampersand is the address operator, which gives you the address of the variable. Now, look at this example where we are creating a variable n, which is integer, and we are printing the address of it. Here we are not creating a pointer and not giving it to point to variable n, but instead directly we are printing the address of n by using the ampersand operator. So at the output, you can see the address is 1000. And when you simply print n, the value is printed, which is 20. And when you print star ampersand n, means value at address 1002, which is nothing but 20. Now there are certain, now look at this diagram. For example, here we have two pointers, rather you can say. There is one variable, there is one pointer which is pointing to that variable, and there is another pointer which is pointing to first point, which is called as pointer. So there is a, like the first pointer will store the address of A, the second pointer will store the address of PTR itself, which is 2000. Now there is a concept called as pointer arithmetic. Like we have two operators which are called as increment and decrement, plus and minus plus. So when a variable, along with a variable, we are using an increment operator, it will increase the value of variable by 1. For example, if there is a variable a with a value 10 and I write a plus plus, which means a equal to a plus 1, so the value will be 11. Similarly, the increment and decrement operators can be used with pointers. So here, when we use increment operator with a pointer, so the address is not increased by 1, but address is increased by the size of the variable to which it is pointing. Now consider this example. There is a variable called as integer I with a value 2 and the address is 4046. When we use the plus plus operator on the pointer, so what pointer stores the address? So 4046. Instead of adding plus 1 to 46, we are adding plus 2 to 46 because integer requires 2 bytes for storage. So plus plus means increase the value of pointer by 1 so that it can point to the next integer variable. So to store one integer variable, we need 2 bytes. Similarly, when there is a character array and we do plus plus, so the character requires only 1 byte. So it will be 405. And when there is a float variable and we do plus plus with a operate with a pointer, it will be 4 bytes. So 4058 plus 4 bytes. Similarly for long ones. So the basic point of difference here is the plus and minus operators, increment and decrement operators, they can be used with the variables as well as on the pointers. When they are used on a variables, they increment and decrement the value of variable by one. But when they are used with pointers, the value is decided based on the data type of a variable. So if it is integer, it will be incremented or decremented by 2. If it is float, it will be incremented or decremented by 4. If it is character, it will be incremented or decremented by 1. So this was about the pointer operations, which is called as pointer arithmetic. Now, quickly we'll be going through some of the important questions. So there is one question which is asking for what is multiple inheritance. We need to give the definition. Then you need to draw this diagram to show the multi-level. And it is also asking that you need to write a class name, data members, and member functions. So you can take any example, and based on that example, you can write the class name, data members, and functions. Explain. Second question is explain virtual base class. Now this is the concept which is already covered in the first video. The third question is about F-close. Now this question is related to the file system. Now just to give a brief description what the file system is. Like in file system chapter, we will be connecting our program to the existing system files, user created files. And through program, we will open the file, we will read the data from the file, or we'll try to add the data into a file. Basically, you are manipulating the file through your program. Manipulating means opening a file, adding the data, deleting the data, and closing. So there are certain header files which are specifically designed for file system. And there are certain functions which we have to use in order to make operations within files. So one of those functions is fclose. As the name suggests, fclose is basically to close the stream so that the stream can now point to some other file. Like in a file system, we have multiple files. Sometimes we want to operate on one file, then close that file and open the next file. So with a single stream object, you can operate on multiple files by opening the files and closing the files. So fclose is used to close the stream. So the syntax is it returns integer value. The method name is fclose and the argument is file stream. File stream pointer, you can say. File stream pointer. So the description is the function is used to close the file stream. The data that is buffered but not returned is flushed to the OS. Is the OS and all unread buffer data is discarded. So whenever we operate on a file, we sometimes read data from the file, or we have certain data to be written on in the file. So that data is buffered, stored somewhere. When you are closing the file, it officially clears all the buffered data, which was either read from the file or is about to be written to the file. So the buffered is clear. So fclose is an important function. Now next, here is an inheritance diagram, single inheritance diagram. So simply we have to create two classes. One with the data members employee ID and name. And there is a derived class employee info with the members basic salary. You have to just simply accept the data, display the data using get data and put data functions. Here's the program. Now, next comes the concept of this point. This pointer is a unique keyword which is used to represent the current object or the object which is used to invoke the member function or call the member function. So, by looking at the previous example only, there is an object E, which is a object of employee input. So this using this E, we are calling get data and put data function. So in turn, this is a pointer which is pointing to E. So a simple definition of this can be it is used to point to an object which is used to call a function. Or you can write it that way, it is a pointer which points to the current object. So here is an example for that. Like we generally write a equal to x over here. So implicitly the compiler writes this of a equal to x. So that is just to showcase that this is pointing to a current object. You can write one example. Now again the next question is based on inheritance. What are the types of inheritance? So you have to explain all five. You have to give you definition properly. Now next is about the virtual function. And we already discussed, we need to create the class as virtual. And in runtime polymorphism, we have to create this function as virtual because the parent class and the derived class both have the function with the same name. So it becomes ambiguity in order to decide which function, or whether we want to call the function the base class or the derived class. So there are certain rules which should be implemented in order to make a function as virtual. So the rule says the virtual functions must be member of some class. Second, they cannot be the static members. They are accessed by using object pointers. And a virtual function can be a friend of another class. The most important points, which are the most important rules which should be considered by making a function as virtual is they should be a part of some of the class. You cannot make them as a static members. And they cannot be accessed using the dot operator. For that, we have to use object pointer to an object and the redirection. We need to define the function as virtual in the base class itself. We can't define the class as a function as virtual in the derived. So these are certain rules which you have to read. And based on the marks weightage, you have to write between 6 to 8 points minimum. Now then the next question which is based on the friend function. So friend function is basically a function which is not part of any of the class. Generally, we have classes which have member functions, and those member functions are accessible within class using that using the object of that class or maybe the derived class. But there can be a function which is not part of the class but still can be used in a class. So that is a friend function. The meaning is literally similar to how we have friends. So there can be one function which can act as a friend to more than one class. So that explanation you have to write first, and then you have to give an example of friend function. So definitely the friend function, in order to demonstrate, we need to create two classes. So here friend function is used to swap the two variables. So one variable is from one class and the other variable is from other class. So there is an X and there is a Y. We want to swap the values using friend function. So here we have to write this, like swap is a friend function to B class. Similarly, swap is a friend function to A class. And after closing both the classes, you have to give the definition of swap function. So this is the normal way of swapping. Swapping is basically interchanging the value of two variables. So here are the two objects which are passed. X is a data member of class A and Y is a data member of class B. So A dot X, we can't directly access the X and Y outside the class. So we have to make use of an object. So A and B are the objects. And in the main, you can directly call the function. So in order to call the friend function, you don't have to use an object. But yes, friend function, you need to pass the objects. Like A and B are the objects. In order to call swap, you don't write A dot swap, but instead you write swap A comma. Now next is a program which is used to count the number of lines in a file. So I'll explain. This is just a small program. Like whatever file you want to open, in order to open a file, you need to first need to know the path of the file. So using the iStream, you need to create the object of a iStream first. So ifstream file is the object. You need to open the file first. So file dot open is a method. And like how many times you have to count? You have to count till you don't reach end of file. So while file means until and unless you have not reached the end of the file, you have to keep on counting. Now, what is the simple way of counting? Is n plus plus. So n is a counter here, which is initially initialized to 0. And with every character which is read, file dot get and in bracket ch means you are reading the contents of file character by character. So for every character which is read, you have to make +1. But now in the question says you don't have to count the characters, you have to count the lines. So line means whenever we have to print on the next line what we write slash. So similarly, here we have to check if the character is slash. So in a file, whenever you reach slash n means you are going to the next line. So one line is over. So whenever there is a slash n, you have to increment the counting by 1. So n plus plus. If the question was just to count the characters in a file, then there was no need to check if the character is slash n or not. You simply retrieve the character from file and increment the pointer. But here we have to find the number of lines. So slash n is the character. And once you reach end of file, you simply have to print the value of n, which is nothing but the number of lines in the file. And at the end, you have to close the file. So file dot close. So basically, your entire operations on file is divided into three parts. The first part is creating the file object. Second, opening the file. Third is you process the data, either you read the data or you insert the data in a file. And finally, you close the file. So all the five programs are based on this. That's it. The next question is about the visibility modes, which we have already discussed in the first video. So you have to draw the diagram which was given, then the table and the explanation. Now the next question is about creating a class, and instead of using a point object, you have to use pointer to the object. So directly you can, the entire program is there. Just the changes in the main, you have to create the object as well as the pointer. So when you are using a pointer, you have to use the directional operator. You can't use a dot. The next program is for the unary operator. So it is a concept of operator overloading. Now, what is overloading? Operator overloading. It is basically giving additional meaning to the existing operator. Now, there are operators, unary and binary. Now, how we define the unary operator? Like the operator which requires single operand is called as unary operator. The operator which requires minimum two operands is called as binary. So, by definition, plus, minus, multiplication, division are the binary operators. Increment, decrement, and negation, single minus, are the unary operators. So here it has been asked to overload a minus unary operator. Minus means negate. So whatever, if the variable value is 10, when we use this operator, the value should become minus 10. So that is the purpose of negation, negative. In order to create the positive value to negative, we use a negation. So now giving additional meaning to the existing operator means like till now we have been using these operators on the variables like integer variable, float variable. Now we will be using them on objects. So for that you have to create a normal class. You can give any name. You need to create the data members, and in the public you write constructor. You have display method, and this is the extra thing which we have. Like you have to overload a minus operator, so you have to write void, then a keyword operator, space, then the symbol of the operator, which is minus, and the round brackets. For unary operators, the return type almost in all cases will be void, and this will not have any argument. But in binary operators, the return type will be object and arguments will be object. So what we want when this operator is called, we want the value of x to be minus x and the value of y to be minus y. So that is what we have written at the bottom. Now in the main, as usual, we create the object. We pass two values, 5 and 6. X is assigned with the value of 5, y is assigned with value of 6. Once you print it, you will see 5 and 6. But when you call this statement minus n1, that time the values will become negative. So minus 5 and minus 6. So if you print after negation, the values will be minus 5 and minus 6. So similarly, you can overload plus plus unary operator and minus minus unary operator. Just the definition over here will change. In plus plus, you will write x is equal to x plus 1, y equal to y plus 2. Rest all will be same. And the operator symbol definitely will change here. Plus plus here also. Here. So that was about the unary operator. Now next is you need to write a syntax to define the derived class, which we already have discussed. This is about the pointer arithmetic, which again we have discussed. Now the last question is about the rules of operator overloading. As I mentioned, there are two types of operator, unary and binary. The unary operator is basically the operator which requires one operand and the binary requires two operands. So there are certain rules. So only the existing operators can do plus, minus, multiplication, division. The known operators, you just can't take any symbol from the keyboard and say like I'm overloading this operator. That is not possible. The operator which is already there, you can overload the operators. That is the first rule. Second rule says the operator must have at least one operand. Obviously, unary operator has one operand, binary operator has two operands. So that is the. And the third rule says you can't change the basic meaning of the operator. Now, for example, you are considering a plus symbol and overloading it to subtract the two values. So that is not allowed. Whatever is the original meaning of the operator, the action should be according to that. We can't use plus to subtract two values. And there are certain operators which cannot be overloaded. Like a number of operators, there are 3 to 4 operators. And in unary operator, like you don't have any explicit argument, and in binary operator overloading, you have explicit arguments. So based on the marks weightage of the question, you have to write between 4 to 6 points, which are rules for return. The question can come for either 4 marks or 2 marks. So minimum 4 points are expected for 2 rules. So this was kind of a revision of the important topics based on chapter 3 4 and 5.